back, guys, and thanks for stopping by. So last week I mentioned a lot of work that I was doing on the side, and one of those things was basically restoring an old porch that is about 100 years old on a much older house. And this porch was damaged during Hurricane Florence last year, and so the screens were blown out. The last time this was restored was about 10 years ago, so this seemed like a perfect time to basically do it all over again. So let me just jump right into it, and we'll talk about the first step, which is sanding. Sanding a screened wooden porch is a tricky, time-consuming beast. During the hurricane last fall, many of the screens were blown out and they also needed to be replaced. The last time the porch was painted was about 10 years ago, so you might as well do the entire porch rather than just replace just the screens. This also meant that everything needed to be sanded: ceiling, wood, framing, and most importantly, the decking. Our goal was to do a really good job with the sanding so that the paint could have a better surface to adhere to and also last a long time, so that we don't have to do this for another 10 years. So we started off wrapping the porch in plastic first so that we could get as much sanding done as possible in case there were any kind of rain, which happens a lot down there. We rented a floor sander for the first weekend and used the coarsest Greene sandpaper that we could find. I think it was around 40 grit. So if you ever do a project like this, you're better off if you have multiple types of sanders, and maybe even multiple of each type of sander, just in case one of those tools breaks and you don't have time to go all the way back to the store. That could be a huge time suck. And you want to have different types of sanders because there are so many different types of surfaces, so many peaks and valleys in the wood, the edging versus the middle of the surface of the floor, the framing area, the ceiling. There's just all types of surfaces. There's tongue and groove boards, and so each one of those presents a unique little challenge that you have to figure out, and just having one sander is definitely not going to cut it. In our case, we used the following types of sanders. We rented one floor sander. This was about 10 inches wide, and this was the heaviest beast. It was probably 150 pounds. But it did a great job and covered the most area in the most efficient amount of time. We also had two orbital sanders. One was a Bosch and one was a Porter cable. We used a belt sander. It has a belt mechanism on it. It's just a smaller version of the larger floor sander, but it's handheld. And it's about the same size as the two orbital sanders. Also, we have one palm sander. It's a DeWalt, and I use that a lot for the straight edges on the framing and around the very edges of the molding. And then a pole sander. How could I forget the pole sander for the ceilings? This was the lightest and the cheapest sander of the bunch, but also the most manually intensive because you are the machine instead of having an actual machine do the work. 10 minutes above your head sanding a ceiling and you're about done. But you have to have it. So it may seem like overkill, but when you only have two people and not a lot of time, you need to maximize efficiency and have as many people sanding as often as possible on as many surfaces as possible. I lost count how many times we ran the floor sander to get most of the paint off. I would say probably 8 to 10 passes to get all the paint off, or the bulk of the paint off the floor area. Eventually you either finish sanding the floor or you just run out of time and you need to return the rental unit. In either case, you have to move on to the smaller and the more meticulous areas, like sanding around the tight edges, sanding around the frame, sanding around the doors, sanding the ceiling. I would also add that if you're ever going to do something like this on your own, make sure to wear protective masks and protective eyewear. And I don't mean just like the cheap little fabric mask. I mean like the full 3M type thing with the filters on both sides. There's a lot of mess in here. There is an enormous amount of paint dust that comes off. You need to sweep often and get that mess out of there as quickly as possible. Like I said earlier, this porch is nearly 100 years old, so there's no telling what kind of paint is in there. All kinds of nasty layers of paint just need to come off. We had multiple trash bags full of just paint dust. So next we removed all the old rotted lattice molding that is used to keep the screens tight. Then we removed all the netting as well. This entire sanding process took us an entire weekend. My wife and I working, dawn till dusk, 2 days in a row. At this point, everything is about as stripped down as it can be. sometimes things just need to look a bit worse before they look better. That will come next week when we start replacing boards and getting ready to paint. Well guys, that's all for this week. Time for us to get back home so that we can come back next week for round 2 and get started on the next phase. Thanks for watching everybody, and I'll see you in the next video.
I ain't a man that you've been looking for. Hearts being darker than a devil's soul.